With Spider-Man Brand New Day on the horizon up ahead, with its new trailer breaking records, I feel like it's important to remember that often in these times of hype and excitement, older films that had a less than favorable response when they came out are often reevaluated by a new audience, often one who is critical of what's coming out now and more forgiving of the stuff they were angry about a decade prior. Such is the case with the Spider-Man films. I've seen on TikTok people even apologize for the less than stellar adaptation of Venom in Spider-Man 3, treating him as some eldritch horror lurking in the wings. However, one I find very interesting is the response to The Amazing Spider-Man and its sequel. Andrew Garfield got a reappraisal from audiences after the release of No Way Home, which, as a fan of those movies, well, a casual fan, well, I like the first one a lot. I feel like these films deserve a reappraisal. Enter SK, a YouTuber who I have a lot of respect for and I have actually streamed with on at least one occasion. He recently put out 2 videos responding to The Amazing Spider-Man, calling both of them awful.
The Amazing Spider-Man is not amazing. These movies certainly had potential, especially with how great of a casting Andrew Garfield is, but they were a mess in the end and certainly took a hit on my hope for Spider-Man in movies. Until Into the Spider-Verse happened.
Hey.
On one hand, I think he's courting controversy, criticizing this movie so soon after the new trailer comes out, but I also think it's interesting because it gives a chance to reevaluate these 2 older films. Through a critical lens, we can evaluate if these films have indeed stood the test of time after being critically panned or critically maybe misaligned upon release, or is there more to it? Is it possible these films are, in some ways, undiscovered gems of the genre? Or is SK right and they're both awful, as people kind of concluded when they first came out? Let's find out.
What's especially frustrating about the first one is that there is a good movie in here. It doesn't need to be reworked from the ground up like the sequel does. There are a lot of moments in isolation that are good, even amazing in this movie. But that of course doesn't fix the many problems in the story.
First and foremost, making the argument that The Amazing Spider-Man is the better of the 2, that's a good start. The movie is indeed much better than The Amazing Spider-Man 2. My problems primarily stem from how incomplete it ultimately is. Many threads are left dangling and, unfortunately, are never really addressed in a satisfying way. Part of this has to do with the numerous amounts of deleted scenes from the movie. About 20 minutes of footage was deleted from The Amazing Spider-Man upon release, and you can feel that. This includes Dr. Connor's family being cut out. That one Oscorp guy who wants to test the serum on children, his conclusion was cut out of the film. And of course, the conclusion of the whole who killed Uncle Ben thing that drives Spider-Man's actions in the first, well, half of the movie before the lizard shows up. All that is annexed and results in this feeling of incompleteness. As a first entry in a trilogy, this is acceptable. You can assume these plot points will be carried out in the following entries. But because it's incomplete, these dangling threads are just that, dangling threads. However, SK's approach is different. He analyzes film by going through the plot and finding inconsistencies in the narrative. But these inconsistencies can also include characters not acting in the most logical fashion. I personally don't think these are flaws necessarily. A character acting irrationally is just the character acting irrationally. It's not really a flaw unless it counteracts the flow of their characterization. That is to say, it feels out of character for them to do such a thing. Or it reduces the conflict or sense of believability in the text itself.
Let's start off with Curt Connors, aka the Lizard. The main issues in his plotline are the setup for his origin, the way his character is explored, and his overall plan in the story.
Now, in theory, I don't disagree with anything he just said. I do think that Dr. Connors' plot is atrophied due to the fact that so many scenes are indeed cut. I think the Lizard has the most potential of all of the Amazing Spider-Man's various villains. It's a very interesting Jekyll and Hyde story, a story of a man driven to complete transformation due to personal tragedy. And in the context of the film, he's also a scientist exploited by the capitalist system. In many senses of the word, he should be one of the best characters. And indeed, there are a lot of scenes that are, again, deleted That humanized Connors immensely post and pre-transformation.
The origin for the lizard doesn't even make any sense. Now, the reason he hasn't tested the formula on himself yet is because they haven't done human trials yet.
Human trials aren't until next week.
However, Ratha disagrees and decides they need to start human trials now, which Kurt refuses because of how dangerous that would be.
Human trials? Where on earth are you going to find the people to volunteer?
As far as anyone's concerned, it's for a winter flu shot. I might think the Veterans Hospital is a place to start.
You've got to be kidding me.
I don't think I am.
So, right off the bat, this has a lot of problems.
To summarize, SK has a lot of problems with the approach that the late Irfan Khan's character Ratha takes when trying to get human trials for the serum.
First of all, why would Ratha ever tell Kurt about this plan? Kurt has made it very clear that he doesn't support human trials against people's consent. It's not just unethical, but it's also highly illegal. And you're telling him to his face that you're gonna do this by sneaking the formula in winter flu shots for a group of veterans. Kurt can easily dial 911 that you're about to poison people, and the police would immediately interfere so the plan doesn't get carried out. What exactly are you gonna tell the police when they question you?
I wanted it to happen, is that wrong?
Second of all, how would he pull this off? He would have to drive all the way to the hospital with whatever team he's working with, then inject the formula into the flu shots.
While yes, a lot of the logistics makes no sense and would easily be exposed if even one cop heard about all this, I don't think that's the real problem with all this. Rather, there are pieces compiling a true problem. After all, corporations historically have done several awful things and gotten away with it for very, very long periods of time without whistleblowers getting attention. The reality simply is that there are many ways they can easily leverage the situation to make it so Connors wouldn't say anything. Perhaps blackmail, perhaps threatening to expose what Dr. Connors knows about the disappearance of Richard Parker, etc., or pin him for some sort of terrorist action, which ultimately is kind of how Oscorp gets around being held accountable for the whole New York almost turning into an island full of lizards thing. No, rather, the actual issue with all of this is that Oscorp is involved with the creation of every single villain in this duology. Now, the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon kinda sorta has something similar, where Oscorp is similarly involved in a lot of the evil doing that goes on in the series. But the difference there is that, it makes sense. Oh, some armor or some military weapon was handed to a guy on the street and now he's the Shocker, or now he's Rhino. But this is like, no, Oscorp just discovered a way to regenerate lost limbs, create giant human-lizard hybrids, infuse electricity into the bones of a human being by accident using electric eels, this, that, and the other, but ultimately, all of it seems to be the desired impact. All of it seems to be done to employees of Oscorp, not random hooligans off the street. There's no plausible deniability here. Oscorp is turning its employees into monsters of the week. How is this company not held accountable to a larger degree? How is Norman Osborn so detached from all this? It does seriously strain credibility that neither Dr. Connors rats out Oscorp or Peter Parker doesn't try to rat out Oscorp to some extent. There's no greater investigation into the death of a police officer on top of a building surrounded by Oscorp technology. It's easy to pin it on a couple rogue actors, but as time goes on and on and on, it makes less and less and less sense that Oscorp's able to escape all this accountability. It just becomes a monster-producing factory, and indeed, from a thematic standpoint, it also removes the accountability for the crimes on the individual criminals. It removes them from the equation, and as such, it makes Lizard, Electro, and even Harry Osborn feel less distinct. They're extensions of the one true bad, which is Oscorp, which is a soulless organization without any real meaningful face to it, because Norman Osborn is dead in the second film and missing in the first.
If the point of this project from Oscorp's perspective is that they need to save Norman as soon as possible,
He doesn't have time. Norman Osborn is dying, Dr. Connors. Save him. We both lose our heads.
then why focus on testing regrowing limbs? Norman isn't suffering from lost limbs, he's suffering from a sickness that's killing him. Yet this experiment is entirely fixated on limb regrowth.
Many of these wonderful creatures have so brilliantly adapted that they can regenerate entire limbs at will. We're trying to harness this capability and transfer it into our host subject, Freddy, the three-legged mouse. Cross-species genetics is finally working. I've used lizard DNA to help Freddy regrow that limb.
Why is this the plan to save Norman? Regenerating his limbs wouldn't save his life. It's not like lizards are known for being completely immune to dying of sicknesses. This can still happen, and their test subjects weren't mice with a sickness comparable to Norman's. The test subjects were three-legged mice. That's what they're specifically testing for. So how would this even save Norman's life? What does this actually achieve for him?
This can probably be explained by saying, oh, this will heal degenerative illnesses of some kind, but it's not made clear in the film itself, which again is not the problem inherently, but rather a symptom of the actual problem throughout the duology. The problem is, Oscorp as a corporation makes no fucking sense whatsoever. Is this a weapons manufacturer? Is this a pharmaceutical company? Is this a medical technology company? Is this a power grid company? Like, what does this company produce and what's it known for? It's not like Meta, it's not like Berkshire Hathaway, it's a singular technology firm that develops technology for seemingly every single ailment possible. So, what's the value here? Is it to save lives? Is it to make weapons? What's the deal? Oscorp as a corporation in the Amazing Spider-Man duology is just hard to determine the value of it. I mean, in the Raimi films, Oscorp uses applied sciences for, in this case, military contracts. That makes sense. In this film, it makes no sense whatsoever, and as such, everything feels kind of formless. Because there's no thought put into what these companies do, the entire thing falls apart. It's not like how with Tony Stark, where in the MCU, many of Stark's actions resulted in Spider-Man villains being created. We know what Tony's doing in those films. It's very clear what Stark Industries is producing. I have no idea what kind of company Oscorp is over the course of 2 films, even though we meet multiple employees from there, even though they're central to every single conflict in the whole film series. I don't know what they do. And that's a pretty fucking big deal when watching a movie series centered on one organization doing something.
So Kurt starts struggling with his arm and realizes it's having negative side effects. So instead of calling the police about it, he calls some random person on the phone about it, then tries entering a taxi to reach Rotha.
What? What are you talking about?
This wouldn't stop Rotha, even if he somehow got there in time throughout all of this traffic and just conveniently spotted his car. What's his plan when he does find him? To knock on the door and hope he unlocks it? Why not just get the police involved? What makes this even worse is that he eventually turns into the lizard, and once he does, they make it very clear that his character changes and his motivation becomes more extreme.
I want to create a world without weakness.
This was taken to an extreme degree, causing the lizard to try forcing his cure onto everyone else.
Then he tried to turn the whole city into lizards. It was crazy.
So if that's true, then why is he still targeting Rotha? Why is he still trying to stop him from spreading the formula to others? I thought he wanted to give them this cure that evidently works on him. What motivation does he have to stop Rotha at this point? Why not go back to Oscorp, use more of the lizard formulas that he had laying around, then take the Ganali device and finish his plan already? He doesn't actually have to go to the sewers to pull this off. He can go to Oscorp and release the formula to the city like he was planning. From the jump, his plan already doesn't make sense.
My primary issue with what SK is doing here, though, is he gets caught up in the minor details of the plot as events go from point to point to point. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what Dr. Connor's immediate actions are after being injected. It matters what he thinks he needs to do. He needs to stop Rotha. He needs to stop Oscorp from testing its serum on innocent veterans. That emotional drive is what drives the narrative. Indeed, emotional logic is often more important than plot logic. People don't act logically in moments, especially high-stress moments, and much of SK's criticism of the first and second movie is characters aren't acting rationally when they need to. That's not to say this isn't a problem, indeed it sometimes is, but I think it distracts from the real problem with the movie, which is that nothing thematically connects. And nowhere is this more obvious than when you ask what should be a very basic question. What is the conflict between Peter Parker and the Lizard? Or, for that matter, what is the conflict between Electro and Peter Parker? Hell, what's the conflict between Harry Osborn and Peter Parker, which I think is the most well-defined of all three?
We just need a bit more time
to figure out something else. Time.
If your argument is only dealing with the external threat these characters pose, You failed writing a compelling villain. There should always be some emotional or intellectual conflict as well, because that actually makes everything that happened hold more emotional resonance. This is something you don't see as a problem in either the Raimi trilogy or the MCU trilogy. In every one of those films, there is an additional emotional and intellectual conflict between Peter and his antagonist of that film. But in the Amazing Spider-Man movies? No, not really. Peter Parker and Dr. Connors stop having an effective relationship once Connors becomes the Lizard. Peter Parker and Electro stop having any emotional connection after the police open fire on Max. And Harry Osborn and Peter, well, their connection just makes no fucking sense, so that's that right there. What makes this all the more frustrating is, as I'm sure you could guess, yes, there were scenes filmed between Peter and Dr. Connors that enriched their relationship that were cut for time. So many of these scenes that were seen as filler were removed. Hell, they reshot scenes to annex Connors from the whole thing. You know, in the movie, Peter Parker kind of discovers that Dr. Connors is going to do his whole evil plan by finding film footage of him and all that. Well, in the movie originally, Peter just helped Dr. Connors and tried to empathize with him, and found his plans just lying around his lair in the sewers. So in that film, it made a lot more sense why he figured out the plan so quickly. But in this one, he has to kind of just stumble upon evidence just lying around. And this removes the emotional connection that came with the scene, the emotional undercurrent that enriched the relationship between characters. Instead, all we get is just, he found the evidence, and there's no need to actually empathize. He's just a monster, he's just a villain.
There's also never a moment where his motivation gets directly confronted by Peter, or at least a moment where they have a meaningful interaction once Kurt is established as an antagonist. Given that they both shared an investment in helping the world, there is a conversation to be had about why either side believes in their methodology, but that's never put to the forefront. There's not a moment where either of them feel betrayed by the other, once both of their identities are revealed, nor do either of them comment on or confront each other on this. Kurt doesn't have a reaction to the fact that the person who's fighting him is the person he mentored, and Peter doesn't have a reaction to the fact that the person he is fighting is his mentor. So if these two didn't know each other personally, most of their interactions would be functionally the same. The confrontation in the sewer would play out the same, the confrontation at the school would play out the same, and the final confrontation would play out the same. So what's valuable about the dynamic between the protagonist and the antagonist? This isn't a question I can answer.
As you can see, SK does acknowledge this key question and offers a compelling response to it. But my problem is, this is very, very, very deep into his criticism of the Lizard. This should be the big headline criticism. The stuff with Dr. Ratha seems by comparison very small to the idea that the entire motivation of the character is uncompelling. Likewise, before mentioning this, he focuses more on the Lizard's intelligence, and I think there's a key issue with how he addresses this.
He literally had Spider-Man fleeing from him. He has no reason to go after him instead of simply going to Oscorp. And even if Spider-Man happens to show up on the way, he knows he can beat him. So the entire school fight is just a waste of the Lizard's time. Now some people might try to counter this by saying that the Lizard makes worse decisions because the formula is affecting his mind. That doesn't work if the Lizard is shown to be intelligent even with the transformation. Not only can he talk, but he can also do this mid-battle. So, yeah, he's still supposed to be smart.
Here I think he conflates intelligence with rationality. There is no world where the Lizard is rational, though intelligent certainly. Stuff like this I feel weakens the general argument, and discussing and conflating different terminologies for intelligence, rationality, logic, it kind of leads the conversation away from the big points of criticism. I think in general it's important to note that SK is addressing the points honestly. He is not acting in bad faith. He is doing a good job with what he's trying to do. I just think his approach to criticizing this movie isn't as effective as it would be to take a more holistic perspective at everything. By looking at actions moment to moment, I think what you end up doing is failing to notice the overarching problems because you're looking too much at the weeds and you're missing the forest as a collective whole. Again, he's doing a good job with what he's working on. I just think he's looking at the wrong things. And of course, conflating, rational behavior with intelligent behavior. And conflating both with good writing. I want to draw your attention to the first episode of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon that has a very similar plot to the Amazing Spider-Man film. In both, the Lizard is the central antagonist, and in both, his plan is to turn all of New York City into a world of reptile people. But the reason that 20-minute episode, I think, is more emotionally compelling than the whole conflict with the Lizard in the Amazing Spider-Man is because the conflict is centered around the Lizard connecting to his family. In the episode, the Lizard kidnaps his wife and threatens to turn her into a lizard person first. That makes the stakes more personal. In The Amazing Spider-Man, we're worried about people we don't know. It's just random people in New York City. The only characters involved in the conflict who matter are Peter Parker and Captain Stacy, who is killed early on. And because he's killed early on, there's no risk of losing him. We've already lost him. Therefore, the entire rest of the proceedings is just a slugfest. Indeed, there's really only one conflict in the entirety of the duology where a character's life that we care about is at risk, and that's the end of the duology when Gwen Stacy dies. And this is one of the reasons why that duology is often celebrated, the relation between Gwen and Peter Parker. Mark Webb, the director of both films, is in fact most well known for making the film 500 Days of Summer, which is a romantic drama, kind of a tragic drama, really, about a doomed romance, or a doomed infatuation, more like. He brought these sensibilities to the duology. My problem is, though, that ultimately, while it's clear he wants to tell a good love story, he is shackled because of the expectations of the superhero genre. He is forced to deliver this large, overarching story that sets up more spin-offs. We are forced to create an Oscorp that pumps out Monsters of the Week. But in doing so, what ends up happening is he wants to tell this very human story about flawed protagonists in love, yet ultimately consistently keeps running into the conflicts of the plot. He can't focus on the relationship, nor can he really advance it after the initial they fall in love phase, because the relationship across both films keeps cycling back upon itself.
Gwen saw firsthand what happened to the real Rodrigo, and she knows that Peter is impersonating him, which got him in trouble with Oscorp and left him completely humiliated. But when she talks to Peter about it, she simply laughs this off, even though that kid's day is ruined and that's Peter's fault. And by extension, it's Gwen's fault because she doesn't speak up about it and try to reach Rodrigo so he gets his rightful place in the internship back. She enables Peter to do this and laughs it off with him, which is also at odds with her character since she went out of her way to defend Peter when Flash was bullying him. And she commended him for his efforts to stand up to Flash.
I thought that was great, what you did out there.
That's one of the reasons given for why she likes Peter. So Gwen looking the other way and even laughing it off when Peter ruins someone's day is making it hard to buy their relationship.
What are you doing, Rodrigo?
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing here?
I was gonna say I work here, but it seems like you in fact do work here, so you know that I don't in fact work here. I just snuck in because I love science.
Peter is obviously lying. He doesn't have a good reason to steal someone's identity and gain access to Oscorp resources. Peter could have criminal intentions for all she knows. She barely knows Peter by this point. Is she not at all concerned by this?
SK spends a lot of time focusing on moments that seem inconsistent with later characterization early on. And that's all well and good, these are inconsistent, but they're also teenagers. They're hormonal, they're stupid, and they're dumb. They are short-sighted. Even intelligent teenagers are still, at the end of the day, stupid teenagers. Any type of inconsistency is explainable because, well, they're hormonal, and they are willing to look the other way when something bad happens because they both are kind of attracted to each other. That makes sense. That's a normal human reaction. What isn't natural, though, is how in the second film, Peter Parker stalks Gwen Stacy wherever she goes, keeps flipping back on whether or not he wants to honor Gwen Stacy's dead father's last wish that he stays away from Gwen, and, many other small details here and there which seem to be really dumb if you're trying to keep a secret identity, but make total sense if you're a love-struck teenager who is, despite being a superhero, kind of short-sighted. Again, being an intelligent chemist does not make you a rational human being. Indeed, many of these sorts of smaller conflicts between characters makes more sense when you realize people don't always act the most rationally around other people. Why does Captain Stacy, for example, not suspect that Peter Parker is Spider-Man despite all the evidence to indicate that? Well, because he underestimates him. That's why. He's just a dumb kid to this guy. And that sounds dismissive. That sounds simple. It's also human. It's also rational to assume that's why someone doesn't expect the obvious going on in front of them is going on. That, of course, said, comics Captain Stacy did in fact figure out who Peter Parker was early on, and it's possible you can interpret this Captain Stacy as also having figured out who Peter Parker is early on and just not saying anything or not having the concrete evidence to prove that case, but I digress. This also addresses why later on SK mentions Uncle Ben as a problem.
Now, I know it's unexpected to have a section about Uncle Ben, but I think even he has a fair share of inconsistencies with his character. Now, Richard Parker wanted him to keep the briefcase safe since it had dangerous research in there that he would never want to get out, and would most definitely say to keep it safe from Peter. It's only after the Lizard's creation when Peter realizes why he'd keep this a secret.
Something my father had been working on, secretly. Now I realize why he kept it a secret.
If Richard Parker knew how dangerous this research could be in the wrong hands, and reasonably would have told May and Ben about this, then why does Ben have this briefcase unlocked in his basement? What if Peter went digging and found it one day? It didn't seem to take much effort for him, especially when you encourage him to do so.
Hey, before you come up, see if there's anything else worth saying.
Oh, well, maybe he forgot about this really important thing that Richard told him about.
I forgot all about that thing.
Why would he forget about something like this? This happening the way that it does is the reason the Lizard exists in this movie, because Uncle Ben forgot.
If not for Uncle Ben, most of us wouldn't be here.
This is made even worse by the fact that Peter learns about Kurt Connors and doesn't know who he is. So instead of taking the briefcase by force, because he's the parent here and has the power to do that, he lets Peter take it and inspect it, and he even encourages him to learn more.
Kurt Connors. That's the name of the guy in the picture with your dad. Go figure.
Uncle Ben is not very responsible in this movie, which is a really weird thing to say.
Why does Uncle Ben allow Peter Parker to pick up his father's briefcase despite knowing it's involved in some sort of terrible thing? Well, he probably doesn't know the full extent of it. SK assumes that Richard Parker told Ben about all the things going on at Oscorp, but that's a big assumption. More than likely, he kept most of it to the chest. The truth simply is, a lot of these characters did not act in the most intelligent way possible, because people are not that intelligent. These are not problems with the movie, in my opinion. The problems with the movie is that the conflict is poorly conveyed through the actions and narrative of the story. The fact is, none of this should be ambiguous. We should have a sense of what Ben knows and what Richard told him. But we don't, because the films never actually give concrete definitions of what anyone knows or what actually is going on, because they haven't decided yet at this point. Why does the Lizard's thing maybe help fix Norman Osborn? Why are the spiders maybe fixing Norman Osborn? Well, the truth simply is that it's decided on the fly. Is it a military weapon? Is it a special pharmaceutical used to cure goblin degenerative disease, whatever it is? We don't know, because they didn't define it early on. And that's the problem. We're so busy setting up all these different plot points, we never stop to think, how do these plot points actually make sense in the narrative? And look, I don't want to act like I don't like SK. SK is fantastic. He has a lot of really good stuff. The fact is, I think his video is generally really good, and there are some really good points mixed in throughout. I just think the problem is, his video on The Amazing Spider-Man is as long as mine, yet he kind of muddies his own point up by focusing on stuff like this instead of what I was just talking about.
When reaching the third act, Peter learns about the Lizard's plan to go to Oscorp and release the Lizard formula onto the city. I don't know why he doesn't call Gwen immediately after this. It's shown to be daytime when he calls about the serum. He then learns about Lizard's plan, then only decides to warn Gwen after she left the school and all the way to Oscorp when it's nighttime.
A couple minutes ago wouldn't have been so bad either.
Why is Peter just standing there and calling Gwen when he can run around and call her? Or swing around and call her? He should be rushing to Oscorp if he knows the Lizard is on his way and Gwen is there right now, but he's literally just standing there during the call, like he's in pause mode.
That makes no sense.
I'm not saying stuff like that isn't useful. It is. But when the big issue with the duology is that you can cut out the entire Richard Parker subplot and actually get a more focused narrative about lab experiments going amok or some shit like that. If you can cut out the whole goblin degenerative disease thing, and what you get is a more focused, more clear and concise narrative. The problem is with these films is not the moment-to-moment action not making sense, even though sometimes it doesn't. The big reason why these films suffer is because it's just so unfocused. Mark Webb clearly wanted to make a romance story, but got caught up in the studio machine making a gigantic blockbuster, trying to fit the corporate mandated requests made upon him. It's a good thing Mark Webb never ever worked for a giant corporate conglomerate film studio again and made more corporate slop designed mainly to satisfy the demands of the studio rather than his own artistic drives. Oh wait, what's that over here? Is that snow? Oh, okay, never mind. I spoke too soon on that one, didn't I? Ultimately speaking, there are a lot of good things about The Amazing Spider-Man, but its conflict is what ultimately brings it down. Because Mark Webb clearly was forced to insert the external conflict and didn't have as much thought put into it as, say, Sam Raimi or anyone at Marvel Studios did when crafting their trilogies. In these films, the external conflict is clearly woven into the internal conflict of the characters. There is a clear drive and thoughtfulness on how all these components fit together. In the Amazing Spider-Man duology, there is not so much a thoughtfulness as a sort of Mad Libs, continuing on the narrative so things can continue. The stuff that works really works, that being Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's chemistry. But what doesn't work is often the driving conflict of the narrative. What I'm saying is, Mark Webb should have just adapted Spider-Man Blue. I mean, seriously.